Hi, I'm Chris Bournet. I'm a writer and a filmmaker, also known as a multimedia creative, someone who is creative in more than one medium. Will micro-budget films save the movie industry? This topic has been on my mind for a couple of reasons. Number one, I'm recording this in April 2020 during the height of the coronavirus, and many of us who work in creative fields are wondering, what is the movie industry, what is the entertainment industry going to look like going forward? None of us know that. I also came across an article in Filmmaker Magazine on this topic, and I'll put the link in the description to this video, kind of exploring what do micro-budget films contribute to the movie industry, what is the future of micro-budget films, and will they help resurrect an ailing film industry if theaters are not able to reopen to full capacity once the coronavirus pandemic is over. In addition to this article I came across, I've also had conversations with filmmaker friends of mine about the future of the movie industry and about what role micro-budget films will play. So one of my filmmaker friends has worked in the traditional movie and commercial industry, and he was kind of lamenting about how little work there is and how when you work in a certain position in the mainstream movie industry, you kind of get pigeonholed in the position that you started in, unless you were just so extraordinary that you're able to kind of break out. But for example, if you're a gaffer, which is the chief electrician on a motion picture or a commercial or a short film, you kind of get pigeonholed as a gaffer. Like, that's all you can do, that's what you're known for. Just kind of stay in your lane and be a gaffer and be happy, and don't try to aspire beyond anything above that or beyond that. And then a couple filmmaker friends of mine who are independent filmmakers, we had this conversation recently where they were talking about how they're optimistic that micro-budget filmmakers like ourselves, and let's just define micro-budget films as less than $100,000. I mean, that's a pretty broad definition, but let's just say movies that are made on a shoestring budget of definitely less than $100,000. So these other filmmaker friends of mine who are independent filmmakers like myself, we were talking about how there is an opportunity for people who work on small budgets to continue to be viable because we are flexible, we're nimble, and we're very creative. You have to be creative when you don't have a whole lot of resources at your fingertips like a big budget production typically has. So the question, will micro budget films save the movie industry? The answer to that is I don't know, but I do believe that micro budget films will continue to be a major and a viable part of the movie industry after this pandemic is over and for years to come, and I'll give you 3 reasons why. Number one, micro-budget filmmakers have the ability to experiment. Now, typically on movies with big budgets, they also have a lot of constraints, meaning that they have a lot of studio executives or investors who are kind of calling the shots literally and kind of telling the filmmaker, you have to do X, Y, and Z, you have to hit these beats in the script, you have to cast my dentist or my girlfriend in a part because they chipped in, $10,000 toward the budget, or they're, give an executive producer credit to someone who doesn't know a camera from a toothpick because they're one of the investors or they're related to a studio executive. So you have a lot of constraints that you have to work within. And also there is a traditional way of filmmaking. Everybody has their union job and you're not supposed to step outside that union job. Unions are great because they help people get fair wages, but also there can be a lot of constraints dealing with unions. So in general, when you have a high budget, you have a high amount of stress and constraints placed on you because when you take people's money, you have to take their you-know-what. So as independent filmmakers, we have the opportunity to experiment without anyone really telling us what to do. Even filmmakers who are established, like Spike Lee, for example, I am taking his master class, and even filmmakers like him who are established, some established filmmakers started out as scrappy independent filmmakers, and they kept that independent spirit with them when they graduated to the studio system. For example, in Spike Lee's Master Class, he talks about how he doesn't write his screenplays in the traditional three-act structure. He even says in the Master Class, this might be blasphemous, but I've never written my stories in, a first act, a second act, and a third act. He said, I just have instincts on how to tell a good story. So Spike brought that independent spirit that he started out with, making his low-budget first movie, She's Gotta Have It. He kind of kept that spirit of, I don't have to do things the traditional way that a studio tells me to do it. I can do it my way. So many of us micro-budget independent filmmakers have that same independent spirit, and that will benefit us and benefit moviegoers and people who love movies, because you get stories that are told in sometimes unconventional ways that can be just as, if not more so, entertaining than the traditional, three-act structure way of telling a story. Another strength that micro-budget independent filmmakers have is the ability to identify off-the-beaten-path, unusual stories that audiences will just lap up. For example, my first movie, a documentary called Lady Wrestler, The Amazing Untold Story of African American Women in the Ring, is about a little-known chapter in history in which black women were world-famous professional wrestlers in the 1950s and 60s, way before some of the girl groups like the Supremes brought black culture and black beauty to an international audience. These women were traveling and wrestling all around the world in places like Japan and Mexico and Australia and different parts of Canada, and they were celebrated as heroines. And then as they began to retire, they sort of faded into obscurity. And many of these women were from my hometown of Columbus, Ohio. So being a journalist and an independent filmmaker working outside of Hollywood, I came across these women's stories and was able to make a documentary about it. I was able to discover this story that someone who is kind of cloistered in New York or LA or a big city like that and is working in the mainstream industry may not have come across. So the third big advantage that micro-budget independent filmmakers have is that we can be creative in the way that we exhibit our movies. Now everyone is wondering, after this pandemic is over, will movie theaters reopen and just kind of resume business as usual? Now I'm a big movie goer, a big movie buff, of course, being a filmmaker, and I really want theaters to be healthy and viable again, but also there needs to be alternatives to showing in a traditional theater, and micro-budget filmmakers have always had to be creative about how to get our work out to audiences. A lot of micro-budget independent filmmakers have had to be innovative and, were kind of ahead of the curve in putting their movies available on streaming services like Amazon and Vimeo and making them available on video on demand, because traditional theaters either wouldn't book their movies or it was too expensive to what they call four-wall rent out a theater, a traditional theater, or they just didn't have a traditional distributor. So a lot of independent filmmakers have had to find alternative ways to get our movies into the hands of viewers who would appreciate them. So we're used to that. For example, I had a screening of Lady Wrestler in a community center in Detroit in late 2019. And I did that because one of the wrestling fans that I interviewed, Kenneth Clark, he lives in Detroit, and I said, hey, where would a good location be to have a screening? And he recommended this community center. So I actually went out and bought a decent sized screen and a projector and showed the movie in this community center in Detroit. It wasn't a traditional theater, but the moviegoers and the wrestling fans who were there enjoyed the experience. So being able to be innovative and creative in the way that we exhibit our movies is definitely an advantage that micro-budget independent filmmakers will have going forward. A lot of the concepts that I've discussed in this video are available in a book about how to turn what you may perceive as your weaknesses or your disadvantages into your superpowers. And it is called The Underdog Advantage by Dean Graziosi. I hope I pronounced his name right. So I will put the link to Dean's book in the description to this video, and I'm not getting any profits from Dean's book. I've never met the man, I don't know him, but I read this book around the holidays and I was just really inspired by the advice he gives on how to take what you may perceive as your disadvantages and turn them around and make them work for you. Again, I'm Chris Bournet, and if you found the content in this video useful, please like it, share it, and subscribe to my channel. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.